All right, so in the previous video, I made this view form. So we made this functionality that we can now render different views depending on what parameter is being passed. And just to refresh your memory, we basically have this, and now we can go here on top and pass this v parameter, and that will let us open a different view. So in this case, this is the form. Now, what I want to do in this video, I want to create a route object to be able to just easily add different views as necessary instead of having all this if construction. So now if I decide to do another view instead of form, I would have to do some sort of like else if statement to now check if that view exists. And if it does, we have to return that other view. If not, we're going to return the home page. So I want to avoid all of that. So let me explain you what I want this to be like. So what I want this to work like, I want to go here and type something like route.path and give it a path. So let's say it's going to be the form path. And give it also the function that that path is supposed to load. So in this case, load form. Do this. So I want to be able to do this to just simply add a new route. So if I wanted to add another one later on, I just want to just repeat this and change this form to a different route and change this function to a different function that's going to load that route and just add different routes by doing this instead of going through all of this if else and all that stuff. Now, hopefully I'll be able to explain this. This is kind of going to be a little complicated, but I'll do my best. So to make this happen, what I'm going to do, I'm going to go on top here and I'm going to create a route object. So now that I have this object, the plan is that I want to be able to add different properties to this object, and those properties are going to be those different routes. So for example, if I have a route form, so for this route, I'm going to add the route and I'm going to say this should be equal to the function that should be loaded through that route. So that's the plan. So, however, I want this to happen over here when I'm doing this line. So to do that, I'm going to add this path function to it. So I'm going to say route.path, and that will be a function. And what this function is going to accept, as you can see here, one is going to be this route. So I'm going to just call that variable route lowercase. And remember, JavaScript is case sensitive language. So this is not the same as this route. And the second parameter, which is this, see, as I'm describing what I want, that's going to be the function that we're going to pass to that for this to work. Oops, I have this comma. I need to get rid of that. Comma should be here. And we'll call that function callback. So those are the two parameters I'm going to pass here. And remember, what I want this to do, I want to assign a new property to this route with this name. So that will be this route name. So to do that, I'm going to say, if we do this, we're going to make route, and we'll open square brackets, and we'll do route, whatever we pass as a route. And we're going to make it equal to the function that we're passing. So remember, my idea was to do this, but that function is going to be different every time. So we're going to just do the callback. So now this should allow us to just run this line, and this line should create a new property on this route, which will have a form property and will assign this load form function to that property. And because of that, now, because we're going to have that route with that property, now we can simply check if that route exists as one of the properties in our routes. So in our if statements, instead of doing if this parameter equals form, I'm just going to say, let's check if that route exists in our route. And the route we're checking for is whatever that parameter is that's being passed over here. So if that's form, we want to check if that form route exists. And if it does, we want to actually load whatever function is loading that route in our case. Now, so what that means that we're going to check if that exists. And the way we're going to do that, we just say if route let's fix that and this. So this is going to be that parameter, which is going to be in this particular case form. And we're going to say if route form exists, which should exist because we're just creating it over here, then what we're going to do, we're going to return something. So that means that route exists. That's good. Now what we want to return, we want to actually return the function, right? Which was passed to that route. And the way we're going to do that is by simply repeating that same thing over here. So instead of saying load form, I'm just going to say return whatever function is assigned to that route. Now that function should execute. So right now this is a function like this without the parentheses to execute that function. So to execute that, we're going to add function parentheses to the end of this, and that should execute whatever function we have passed to that route. So if I save this, hopefully this shouldn't change anything. So we should be able to go back and refresh. Function works. And if I go back and change this to something else, this still works the way it used to work. Now, because of this change, now I don't really need to change anything in this part, but I should be able to now easily add new routes. So let's say I want to add another route that should be loading yet another page, right? So I'm going to just basically repeat this line, and I'm going to say what's going to be the new path of that new page. So I'm going to say about, that's going to be our about page. And it should be loading some function. So whatever function we're going to create to load that page. So I'm going to say load about or something. Now, because I made that, I have to create this function, right? So I'm going to copy that and go below here and create a function that will be load about, and we'll open and do all this brackets and all this stuff. And then we want this function to return some sort of HTML. So for now, let's just do a very basic HTML service return. So I'm going to say create HTML output, and we'll just hard code our HTML right here. I'll do an h1 about us. H1 closed, and that should do it. That should return what we need, the HTML output. So I'm going to save this. So now let's test this out. So the idea is that now we should have a new route about that should be loading this. Okay, so go back here. So we have this. So if you refresh, that should just return this same thing. If we click on this, we already made a link. Remember, that goes to our form. That's good. Now let's try that about route. And here we go. Now we load yet another route. So that creates some sort of, I guess, router that we made. And now we should be able to easily just add new routes to our application. You can call this pages, I guess, whatever you want to call it. And that should just work out. Now, the other change I want to do to this application, I want to also create a render function. So see how we load all this HTML service stuff all the time. So since this is a very common thing that's going to happen, instead of doing this whole thing when we create a template variable that we do the passing of the arguments this way and we return the evaluate, what I want this to look like, I simply want to replace these three lines with a return that's going to say render, and I'm gonna pass the file that should be used as a template to render, and as a second parameter, as an optional, I want to be able to pass all this different, like if I have any values, I want to be able to pass to it. So for example, if I was passing this HTML list array, I want to simply create something like, it's here. I want to have an object that I'm passing that's gonna say list colon that, and that should give me the option now to pass different arguments to this template. And obviously, if I wanted to pass multiple things, I just want to do comma, and let's say I also pass a title. I want to say title, colon, and whatever that title is gonna be in here. But for now, I'm just gonna do one, but we're gonna create this in a way that's gonna work for multiple as well. So I want to replace this by this and make this work. So for that, obviously, we have to create that render function. So I don't really need to load this about thing, so I'm gonna get rid of this. We're just testing to make sure that works. That's good. Now, all of this I don't want. So this will be our render function. So our render function should accept this, which is the file, comma, and the second optional parameter here is this arguments object. So we'll just say args object. So that should be that. So what we want this to do, we want to pretty much do most of this. So I'm gonna cut that and move that over here like this. Now instead of this page, it's gonna be the file, which is gonna be passed by the function over here. So it's gonna pass the page here, which is gonna be page over here. That's gonna create our template from that file. And then we want to be able to add any arguments if user did pass some arguments to this. So we're gonna create an if statement, and we're gonna check if the user did pass any arguments. So we're gonna say if this. So in that case, we're gonna want to assign those arguments to our TMP over here, right? To this. And we're gonna assign everything that was passed. So in this case, it's just one, but in other cases, it's gonna be tons of other things. So what we're gonna do, the way we're gonna do that, first we're gonna get the keys that are passed to that arguments object. So I'm gonna do object dot keys, and I'm gonna do this. So let me just store it in a variable var keys equals to this. So those would be the keys passed to that object if that object exists. If it does, we want to just loop through those keys. So I'm going to do keys dot for each to loop through those keys, and this is going to accept a callback function. And that callback function is going to have different key every time. And that key is going to be, in our case, see this list. It's just going to be one. Or if we have multiple here, comma separated, it's going to be list. Then I had the title, it would be title, and so on. So what we want this to do, let me move this to another line here. So we're going to loop through those keys, and we want to assign those to this TMP, which is this template we did here. So I'm going to say tmp.key. So I'm going to create that key on that TMP. So, and again, remember this tmp.list is the same as saying tmp list. That's like alternative syntax. And we can also do this. So I'm going to use that alternative syntax, and I'm going to say that key should be equal to, well, it should be equal to whatever they passed here, right? So that's going to be that key from this arguments object. So I'm going to say args object key. So that will allow us that optional parameter to send some arguments to this, and don't need this anymore. So, and if, and then we'll just return the template after we evaluate it. Now let me just test this and make sure this whole idea works like this. So I'm gonna save this, go back to this. Now, if I refresh, that about page doesn't exist anymore because I removed it. It just goes to our home page. Now let's do the form. This is where we're gonna find out what happens here. So that loaded. Now let's see if that list loaded too. Awesome, it did. So that list was, if you remember, we were passing that list of options to here, and that's still working the same way. So that means passing that worked. So now we have this render to do this. And I don't need to keep this here. I'm just gonna cut it and put it in this other file. This is where I'm doing this type of functions that help me to simplify my syntax. So I'm gonna save this. So that's gonna be load form. So what this is gonna allow me to do now, instead of doing like this now, I could simply just say render home. And that should now work the same way. I'm gonna save, refresh. This is this. Let's view another one. So that seems to work fine. Now let's test both of these functionalities together. Now let's say I want to create another route. So I'm gonna create another path. I'm gonna say about, I guess. That was good enough. I'll do load about. Right? That should create the new route about. And now if we just create that function, something like this, we should be able to render our new view. So in our case, we'll do an about page. Now keep in mind that this about page has to be one of our HTML pages, which doesn't exist right now. So I'm gonna have to create it. So I'm gonna do file new HTML file, call it exactly the same, about, hit OK. There is this. This will be our HTML now. My about page. It's good. So now I made the file. I don't need to have this. I have this render that page. Let's try this. That's this. Now we're gonna have to pass that v about. And there it is. It loads our about page. And we should be able to pass arguments to this page if we wanted to, like this. And we're gonna say title colon use this title, and then we could pass something else to this. Let's try that too. Other equals to other text, something like that. So now we should be passing two parameters to our about page, one called title, the other called other, and we should be able to use it in our template. So here we are. And that means instead of doing this, I can now use my template syntax and just do, that is one of the parameters was title. And let's do another one. And the other one was called other. And let's make H2 for this. Save it, go back and reload. There it is. So now we're able to pass those parameters. And if we go to form, that should be loading our form. Good. So all of that works. I don't really need this about page or all of this other stuff. So I'm just going to delete that page. I'm also going to delete this function. And I'm going to delete the route. Here we go. Now we made our renderer and we made our router, whatever you want to call this. And that should be it for this video. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and I'll see you in the next video.